The janitor's triumph mocked and humiliated until the truth changed everything. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Miguel Reyes pushed his mop across the gleaming floor of Westridge Academy. The prestigious private school was quiet at this hour. Most students had gone home, teachers were grading papers in their classrooms, and only the occasional administrator hurried through the hallways, barely acknowledging his existence. Miguel was used to it. At 53, he had been the janitor at Westridge for nearly 15 years, quietly maintaining the school's pristine appearance while remaining virtually invisible to those who walked its halls. His brown skin, calloused hands, and heavily accented English marked him as an outsider in this temple of privilege, where tuition costs exceeded what he earned in a year. "Excuse me, Mr. Reyes?" The sharp voice of Principal Victoria Hamilton cut through the silence. She stood tall in her immaculate designer suit, not a hair out of place in her blonde bob. Miguel immediately straightened his posture. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton? The board members will be touring the facilities tomorrow morning. I need the entire East Wing spotless by 7 a.m. She didn't wait for his response before adding, "And please wear something more appropriate. That shirt has a stain." Miguel looked down at his uniform. The small coffee spot was barely noticeable, but he nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton, I will take care of it." "Good." She turned to leave but paused. "Oh, and the boys' locker room smells terrible. Handle that tonight as well." As her heels clicked away down the corridor, Miguel sighed quietly. It was already 6 p.m., and he was supposed to finish at 7. His daughter Lucia had a scholarship showcase at the community college tonight. Her chance to perform her original music compositions for potential university sponsors. He had promised to be there. But promises were luxuries in a world where people like him were expected to be grateful just to have a job. "I'm sorry, Papa." Lucia's voice crackled through Miguel's old phone as he scrubbed at the grout between shower tiles in the locker room. "It's okay if you can't make it." But it wasn't okay. Miguel could hear the disappointment in his daughter's voice, even as she tried to hide it. "I will try, Mija. I promise I will try." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. After hanging up, Miguel attacked the tiles with renewed vigor, hoping to finish in time. His back ached, his knees protested, but he kept going. He didn't hear the laughter at first. Not until it grew louder, accompanied by the sound of expensive sneakers squeaking against the freshly mopped floor. "Yo, check it out, it's the janitor working overtime." Miguel recognized the voice immediately. Blake Hamilton, Principal Hamilton's son and the school's star lacrosse player, stood at the locker room entrance with 3 of his teammates. "Careful, bro," one of the other boys snickered. "He might not understand English." Miguel kept his eyes down, continuing his work. These were just children, he reminded himself, privileged, entitled children who had never known hardship. "Hey," Blake called out. "We need to get our gear. We have an early practice tomorrow." Miguel nodded and moved to the side, giving them space to access their lockers. But as Blake walked past, he deliberately knocked over Miguel's bucket, sending dirty water across the floor Miguel had just cleaned. "Oops," Blake said with mock concern as his friends howled with laughter. "Looks like you missed a spot." The boys rummaged through their lockers, tossing equipment onto the benches and floor. Miguel silently began mopping up the spilled water, his jaw clenched tight. "My mom says they should outsource the cleaning staff," Blake announced loudly, making sure Miguel could hear. "Says it's cheaper than paying benefits to people who probably shouldn't even be in the country." The words stung worse than the backache or the missed recital. Miguel had been a legal resident for decades and a citizen for the past 8 years. Not that it mattered to people like the Hamiltons. "Yo, janitor," Blake called, holding out an expensive water bottle. "This is dirty, clean it for me?" Miguel looked up, meeting the boy's eyes for the first time. "My name is Mr. Reyes." Blake's eyebrows shot up and his friends fell silent for a moment before erupting into even louder laughter. "Mr. Reyes?" Blake mimicked with an exaggerated accent. "Sorry, senor, my bottle, please." Something in Miguel wanted to refuse, to tell this boy exactly what he thought of his behavior, but the image of his daughter flashed in his mind. His job paid for their small apartment, for Lucia's music lessons, for the chance at a better life than the one he'd had. So he reached for the bottle. As his fingers touched it, Blake let go, letting it drop to the wet floor. "Actually, I changed my mind. It's probably contaminated now." The boys laughed again as they headed for the exit. Blake paused at the door. "Make sure this place is clean for tomorrow, Mr. Reyes. My dad's on the board, and they don't like dirty facilities." After they left, Miguel stood alone in the empty locker room, surrounded by the mess they'd deliberately made. He looked at his watch. 7:45 p.m. Lucia's showcase had already started. As he bent down to pick up the scattered equipment, something hard and sharp jabbed into his knee. Pain shot up his leg and he winced, reaching down to find a lacrosse cleat with its metal spike pointing upward, positioned exactly where he would kneel to clean up the water. It was no accident. For a moment, rage bubbled up inside him, hot and unfamiliar. In all his years of enduring slights, insults, and disrespect, he had always swallowed his pride, always kept his head down, always remembered what was at stake. But as he looked at the blood now seeping through his pants from his injured knee, something shifted inside Miguel Reyes. A small voice whispered that perhaps it was time for a different approach. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. With a deep breath, he returned to his work. He had a job to finish. The next morning, Miguel arrived early, his uniform freshly pressed despite the late night. His knee throbbed beneath a bandage, but he ignored the pain as he put the finishing touches on the east wing. Principal Hamilton appeared at 6:45 a.m., clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes scanning for any imperfection. "The board members will be here in 15 minutes, she announced without greeting. "I assume everything is ready." "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton," Miguel replied. "The east wing is complete." She nodded curtly and turned to leave, but paused when she noticed his slight limp. "Are you injured?" For a brief moment, Miguel considered telling her about her son's behavior, but the cold calculation in her eyes stopped him. "It's nothing, just an old knee problem." "Well, try not to be so obvious about it during the tour, it looks unprofessional." She glanced at her watch. "The board will want refreshments in the conference room after the tour. Make sure everything is set up." As she walked away, Miguel saw Blake and his friends entering the school. Blake smirked when he spotted Miguel, nudging his friends and whispering something that made them laugh. Miguel busied himself with final preparations, trying to ignore them, but as he passed near the group, he overheard Blake's words. "Did you see his knee? Guess he found my little surprise." The boys snickered, unaware that Miguel had heard. The confirmation of their deliberate cruelty sent a chill through him, but he kept walking, his expression carefully neutral. By 7 a.m., board members began arriving. Men and women in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios and radiating authority. Principal Hamilton greeted each one warmly, leading them toward the conference room, where Miguel had arranged coffee, water, and pastries. "Before we begin our meeting, I'd like to show you the improvements we've made to the East Wing," she announced. "Our exemplary maintenance staff has been working diligently to ensure everything is perfect for your inspection." The group nodded approvingly, following her out of the room. As they toured the facilities, Miguel trailed behind at a respectful distance, ready to address any concerns. None of the board members acknowledged him except for one, an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair who offered a small nod when their eyes met. The tour continued through classrooms, laboratories, and finally the athletic facilities. As they entered the boys' locker room, Principal Hamilton gestured proudly. "As you can see, we maintain the highest standards of cleanliness throughout our campus, even in traditionally challenging areas like athletic facilities." The board members murmured their approval, examining the gleaming surfaces and organized equipment. But as they prepared to leave, Blake and his lacrosse teammates burst in, apparently returning from an early morning practice. "Oh," Principal Hamilton exclaimed with surprise that seemed rehearsed to Miguel's ears. "Board members, this is a fortunate coincidence. Allow me to introduce some of our star athletes, including my son Blake, captain of our championship lacrosse team." Blake straightened, immediately adopting a polite, respectful demeanor that was nothing like his behavior the previous night. "It's an honor to meet you all," he said with a practiced smile. The board members smiled indulgently, clearly impressed by the well-spoken young man. One of them, a woman with a pearl necklace, asked, "How do you find the facilities here? Is everything maintained to your satisfaction?" Blake's eyes flickered briefly to Miguel before he answered, "Absolutely. Everything is always perfect, although, Principal Hamilton prompted, a hint of tension in her voice. "Well," Blake said, his expression turning serious, "sometimes the cleaning staff can be a bit intrusive during our practice times. Perhaps a different schedule would be beneficial." Miguel's hands tightened around the handle of his cleaning cart. The audacity of the lie after what they had done to him the night before was almost unbelievable. Principal Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. "That's something we can certainly address. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, Blake." The older board member with salt and pepper hair spoke up. "And how do the staff respond when you raise these concerns with them?" Blake hesitated, clearly not expecting follow-up questions. "Well, there can be communication issues sometimes." His friends nodded in agreement. "Communication issues," the board member pressed. "You know," Blake shrugged, glancing at his friends for support. "Language barriers and such?" Principal Hamilton intervened smoothly. "We're working on improving cross-departmental communication. Now, shall we continue to the library? We've made some exciting upgrades to the digital research systems." As the group filed out, Miguel stood frozen, the familiar mixture of anger and helplessness washing over him. Not only had he been humiliated and injured, but now he was being blamed for disrupting the students' activities. The older board member was the last to leave. He paused next to Miguel and said quietly, "Good work in here. Very thorough." Miguel nodded, surprised by the simple acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir." The man studied him for a moment longer before following the others. After the board meeting concluded, Miguel was called to Principal Hamilton's office. She sat behind her massive desk, Blake lounging in a chair opposite her with a smug expression. "Mr. Reyes," she began without preamble, "I've asked you here because my son has brought some concerns to my attention. Apparently you've been exhibiting some hostile behavior toward the students." Miguel blinked in disbelief. "Hostile behavior? I don't understand." Blake leaned forward. "You glared at me and my friends this morning, and yesterday you refused to help when I asked you to clean my water bottle." Miguel struggled to maintain his composure. "Mrs. Hamilton, that is not what happened. Your son? Are you calling my son a liar?" Her voice was razor sharp. "No, but—" "Mr. Reyes," she interrupted, "you need to understand your position here. You are a member of the support staff. Your job is to maintain the facilities and provide assistance when needed, not to engage in confrontations with students." "I have never confronted any student," Miguel said firmly. "But last night your son and his friends deliberately—" "Enough!" Principal Hamilton stood, her perfectly manicured hands flat on the desk. "I won't tolerate these accusations. Blake is a model student with an impeccable record. You, on the other hand, have been increasingly problematic. The late completions, the limping, the attitude, it's becoming an issue." Miguel felt a coldness spreading through his chest. "I was limping because I was injured in the locker room last night when you failed to properly clean up water on the floor," Blake interjected smoothly. "Mom, he probably slipped because he didn't use the wet floor signs. That's a safety violation." Principal Hamilton nodded. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Mr. Reyes. You're not following proper protocols, and now you're trying to shift blame. I'm putting you on probation. One more incident, and we'll have to terminate your employment." The injustice of it all threatened to choke Miguel. 15 years of dedicated service, of swallowing insults and enduring disrespect, and this was his reward? Being threatened with termination, based on the lies of a privileged bully. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said quietly, "I have worked at this school for 15 years. I have never had a complaint against me. I have never missed a day. I stayed until midnight last night to prepare for the board visit, missing my daughter's music showcase. And now you are putting me on probation because your son is not telling the truth." Principal Hamilton's expression hardened. "That's enough, Mr. Reyes. You're dismissed. And I suggest you think carefully about your attitude if you want to keep your position here." As Miguel turned to leave, Blake smirked at him from behind his mother's back. The message was clear: "You don't matter. You can't touch me." Miguel walked out of the office with his head high, despite the pain in his knee and the burning sense of injustice. In that moment, he made a decision. No more silence. No more submission. Some things were worth fighting for, and his dignity was one of them. The next morning, Miguel arrived at school with a small device in his pocket. It had been Lucia's idea, her parting gift before heading back to college after her showcase. "Papa, they can't keep treating you like this," she had insisted, pressing the mini voice recorder into his hand. "Next time, get proof." The opportunity came sooner than expected. As Miguel cleaned the hallway outside the science labs, Blake and his friends surrounded him. "Hey, Senor," Blake called loudly. "My jacket got dirty during practice. Clean it for me?" He held out an expensive team jacket, deliberately dropping it on the wet floor when Miguel reached for it. "Pick it up," Blake demanded, his tone no longer playful but cold and commanding. Miguel looked at the boy steadily. "No." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Blake's friends exchanged surprised glances. "What did you just say?" Blake stepped closer. "I said no," Miguel repeated, his hand in his pocket activating the recorder. "I am not here to pick up after you. I am here to maintain the school facilities." Blake's face darkened with anger. "You're the janitor. That's your job." "My job description does not include being your personal servant or tolerating your disrespect," Miguel replied evenly. "I know what you did in the locker room. The cleat that injured my knee was not an accident." One of Blake's friends shifted uncomfortably, but Blake just laughed. "Prove it. It's your word against mine, and we both know who everyone will believe." "Is that what your parents taught you?" Miguel asked quietly. "That it's acceptable to hurt people you consider beneath you?" "Don't talk about my parents," Blake snapped. "My father is on the board of this school. My mother runs this place. They could fire you with one phone call." "Perhaps they could," Miguel agreed. "But would they be proud of what you're doing right now?" "They wouldn't care," Blake scoffed. "You're just the help. The illegal they keep around to mop floors." "I am a United States citizen," Miguel said firmly. "I have 2 daughters in college. I own my home, and I deserve basic respect, just like anyone else." Blake's face twisted with contempt. "You don't deserve anything. You know what my dad calls people like you? Replaceable. We could have a new janitor by tomorrow and no one would even notice you were gone." As the cruel words echoed in the empty hallway, a door opened behind them. The older board member with salt and pepper hair stood there, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene. Blake immediately straightened, his demeanor changing instantly. "Mr. Alvarez, we were just, I heard," the man said simply, his eyes moving from Blake to Miguel. "Every word." An emergency meeting was called that afternoon. Miguel sat in the conference room, his hands folded on the table, facing Principal Hamilton, the school's legal counsel, and 3 board members, including Mr. Alvarez. "This is preposterous," Principal Hamilton declared, her usual composure slipping. "My son would never engage in such behavior. Mr. Reyes is clearly fabricating these allegations because he was put on probation for poor performance." "The recording is quite clear, Victoria," Mr. Alvarez said quietly. He looked at Miguel, and it matches exactly what I witnessed in the hallway today. "A recording made without consent is inadmissible and possibly illegal," the legal counsel interjected. "Connecticut is a one-party consent state," Miguel replied calmly. "I was part of the conversation and consented to the recording. But Mr. Alvarez's testimony doesn't require any recording. Principal Hamilton's eyes narrowed. Since when does a janitor know about state recording laws? Since my daughter began studying pre-law at Yale, Miguel answered, watching their expressions change. The daughter whose scholarship showcase I missed because I was cleaning up the mess your son deliberately made. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat. Mr. Reyes, could you give us a moment to discuss this privately? Miguel nodded and stepped outside, waiting in the hallway while the board members conferred. Through the door, he could hear Principal Hamilton's raised voice, though the words were indistinct. After 20 minutes, he was called back in. Principal Hamilton's face was flushed, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Mr. Reyes, Mr. Alvarez began, first, let me apologize for what you've experienced. It's unacceptable and contrary to everything Westridge Academy claims to stand for. Miguel nodded but remained silent. We'd like to offer you a formal apology, compensation for your injury, and assurances that the students involved will face appropriate disciplinary action. Principal Hamilton interjected. While we acknowledge that there may have been some inappropriate behavior from certain students, we also need to consider the context and… Victoria, Mr. Alvarez cut her off firmly. We've reached a decision. This isn't a negotiation. He turned back to Miguel. Mr. Reyes, we'd also like to offer you a promotion to facilities manager with a significant salary increase. Your 15 years of service should have been recognized long before now. Miguel considered the offer carefully. The promotion would mean better hours, better pay, and more respect. But something felt incomplete. I appreciate the offer, he said finally. But what happens to Mrs. Hamilton and her son? The room grew tense again. Mr. Alvarez sighed. Personnel matters regarding Mrs. Hamilton will be handled by the board privately. As for Blake and the other students, they will face suspension and mandatory community service, including, ironically, janitorial work under your supervision, should you accept the promotion. Principal Hamilton's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the table, but she remained silent. Miguel thought about it, then shook his head. I cannot accept the promotion under these conditions. Mr. Reyes, one of the other board members spoke up, clearly surprised. This is a generous offer considering the circumstances. You would be well within your rights to pursue legal action, but we're trying to resolve this amicably. I understand, Miguel replied, and I appreciate the offer, but I cannot supervise Blake or accept a promotion while Mrs. Hamilton remains in her position. The problem is not just with her son, it's with the culture she has created and enabled. How dare you, Principal Hamilton burst out, after everything this school has done for you. Victoria, Mr. Alvarez warned, enough. He studied Miguel with newfound respect. What would you consider an acceptable resolution, Mr. Reyes? Miguel met his gaze steadily. Real change. Not just for me, but for everyone who works here. The cafeteria staff, the groundskeepers, the security guards, all the people who are treated as invisible. We deserve dignity and respect. That's rather vague, the legal counsel noted. Then let me be specific, Miguel said. I want a staff council with direct representation to the board. I want anti-bullying policies that protect everyone, not just students. I want cultural sensitivity training for all faculty, staff, and students. And I want Mrs. Hamilton to publicly acknowledge what happened and take responsibility for her role in it. The room fell silent again. Principal Hamilton looked as though she might explode. The legal counsel scribbled furiously on a notepad. Finally, Mr. Alvarez spoke. Those are substantial requests. Yes, Miguel agreed, because this is a substantial problem. And if we refuse? The legal counsel asked. Miguel reached into his pocket and placed a business card on the table. Then my daughter's professor at Yale Law School would be very interested in taking this case, pro bono, of course. Mr. Alvarez picked up the card, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read the name of one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the state. He looked at Miguel with new understanding. "You've been planning this." "No," Miguel corrected him. "I've been enduring it. Planning implies I wanted this to happen. I simply prepared for when it inevitably would." Principal Hamilton stood abruptly. "This is blackmail." "This is accountability," Miguel countered calmly. "Something that's been missing at Westridge for a very long time." 3 months later, Miguel stood in the staff break room of Westridge Academy, pinning the final notice to the bulletin board. The newly formed staff council would hold its inaugural meeting next week, with representatives from every department. Beside him stood Esther from the cafeteria and Jamal from security, both elected by their peers to serve on the council. The school had changed dramatically since that confrontation in the conference room. Principal Hamilton had been asked to resign, replaced by an interim administrator, while a search committee, which included staff representatives, looked for a permanent replacement. Blake and his friends had been suspended, required to perform community service, and mandated to attend extensive counseling sessions. Most importantly, a new respect had emerged throughout the school. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was real and growing. As Miguel stepped back to admire their work, the door opened and Mr. Alvarez entered. "Mr. Reyes," he greeted warmly, "the new facilities look excellent. The board is very impressed with how you've reorganized the maintenance schedules." "Thank you, Mr. Alvarez," Miguel replied, shaking the offered hand. "We've been able to improve efficiency while actually reducing overtime hours." "Outstanding, and please, call me Carlos." He glanced at the bulletin board. "First council meeting coming up, I see? Nervous?" Miguel smiled. "A little, but it's important work." Carlos nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I first joined this board, I hoped to make a difference. My own parents were immigrants. My father worked as a janitor for 30 years. But I never imagined the change would come quite like this." "Sometimes change needs a catalyst," Miguel observed. "Indeed." Carlos hesitated, then added, "I received a call from Yale yesterday. Your daughter Lucia's composition won the regional showcase. They're offering her a full scholarship for graduate studies." Miguel's eyes widened with surprise and pride. "She didn't tell me." "She wanted it to be a surprise. She mentioned you'd be attending her performance this weekend." "Yes," Miguel nodded, smile growing wider. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." As they walked together down the hallway, not as superior and subordinate, but as equals, Miguel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. For years he had believed that keeping his head down was the only way to survive, that silence was the price of security. But sometimes, standing tall was not just about personal dignity. It was about creating space for others to stand tall as well. The true measure of his victory wasn't in what he had gained personally, but in what had changed for everyone. Through the windows he could see students crossing the campus. Among them was Blake Hamilton, noticeably subdued since his return from suspension. The boy caught sight of Miguel and, after a moment's hesitation, offered a small, uncertain nod of acknowledgement. Miguel returned the gesture, neither hostile nor friendly, simply acknowledging the boy's existence, just as he had finally demanded his own be acknowledged. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way, but they were often the ones that lasted longest. As he continued his rounds through the school that had once made him feel invisible, Miguel Reyes walked with his head high and his steps sure. The school hadn't just gained a janitor with a voice, it had found its conscience. And that, perhaps, was the most important cleaning job he had ever done. End of narrative.